text this morning comes from the Gospels, Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, beginning with verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great gale arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of God for you, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Amen.
The master laid his head down to sleep. The sky began to darken, the rain began to fall. The water tossed the boat from side to side. Struggling to find assurance, they woke him in distress, crying, "Save us, Lord, or we will surely die." He said, "Peace, be still." Winds and waves were calmed by his voice. He said, "Peace, be still." And the miracle began by the power of his command. Peace, be still. When trouble rained upon me, sorrow gathered like a fog, and it seemed my Savior's face was hid from mine. My heavy heart was full of doubt, shaken by the storm. Then I felt his words bring comfort deep inside. He said, "Peace, be still." Troubled heart was calmed by his voice. He said, "Peace, be still."
okay. You can talk. Thank you. Let us pray. Living God, our refuge and our strength, you called us to be here this morning, and we remember that you called nothing into something. So even the wind and sea obey your voice, like our souls obeyed your nudging this morning. We ask that you put the wind back in its place, and just like the choir sang, tell the sea, peace, be still. Fill us with great faith, and save us from the surging waters, so that we may tell the good news of your saving grace and love through Jesus Christ, our very hope in the storms of life. For we ask it in your Son's name and for his sake. Amen. I am told that one summer night a violent thunderstorm filled the sky and lightning struck everywhere, and a little fella cried out in the middle of the night in fear. And his mother, like any mother would, got up and ran into his room and sat down beside him and waited out the flashes of lightning and the loud thunder with him. And when it all had ended, he asked his mother, "Will you sleep with me here tonight?" And she said, "No, dear, I have to sleep with Daddy." And he bolted straight up in the bed, looked at his mother and said, "Well, that big sissy." We all have some fears, don't we? Of course we do. It's a part of being human. We have some dreads, and we have some fears. It might be the security of our children. It might be the security of our grandchildren. We may fear a financial burden. We may fear getting older. And as the shadows of life lengthen, we may fear both life and whatever is next. We may fear health issues or the world in which is being presented our families in the future. We may fear the state of the world today. Yet, life is full of fear. I remember my first real experience with unmitigated fear. We were living in the Midwest, and I petitioned my mother repeatedly to allow me to walk to school the first day of first grade. Now, she had walked me to school for kindergarten, but I was older now, and I petitioned to walk alone. Well, I kept it up until she finally acquiesced and said, "Okay, you can walk to school." And on the first day, we stood on the front porch of the house, and she leaned down, kissed me on the forehead, and sent me along with a pat on the rear. And I must say, I don't think I ever stepped as high as I did that morning, walking down the sidewalk towards school the first day of the first grade. But you guessed it, it was way too good to be true. About a block away, out of sight of my mother, he struck. It was a frightening experience. It was a terrifying event. The assault lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed like hours. And although I survived the attack by breaking free and running away. I was terrified the rest of the day, and I sat there in class thinking about the attack. I couldn't color, I couldn't repeat anything, I couldn't laugh, I couldn't smile, I couldn't eat. I just remembered the attack. All through the day, my heart raced, and I twisted and turned in my seat. I was filled, as you can imagine, with dread. And yes, on the way home, I was attacked again, and I was unable to get it off my mind. It wouldn't go anywhere. And I did sit staring at my meal. I couldn't eat it. And at night I tossed and turned. I dreamed about it. And when I woke up in the morning, it was still there. What should I do? Should I tell my mother? Should I tell my dad? Well, should I tell the teachers? No, I was too embarrassed because I had lobbied everybody older than me to allow me to walk to school. And now here I am, frightened to death about the journey from my house to the schoolhouse. Well, there, I guess, were options. Maybe if I went around this way instead of that way, maybe I could free myself from the attacks. But then again, I would get to school late and I would be reported by my teachers to my mother. So I chose to pray about it all. And I prayed with the zeal of a holy saint. It was clean and simple. I begged, Jesus, please take care of this. Jesus, please take care of this. But guess what? It continued. It continued. And then one morning, as I approached ground zero, I saw some cars stopped in the middle of the street, and there was a red light flashing. Back then, the police had red lights rather than blue lights. The red lights were flashing. And then in the road, there, dead, was my nemesis, my tormentor, the bane of my existence. There, from beneath the front tires protruding, were two legs of a dark green, ugly, rusted-out Buick. It was the body of that kamikaze goose that had chased me for nearly a month, honking and biting me in the seat of my pants. And I stared at that inanimate object for a long time. Then my head went erect, shoulders went back, and a smirk, I guess, appeared on my face. And I walked away with my faith emboldened, knowing that it was God Himself that sent that Buick into my life. Fear is real, though, isn't it? It's debilitating. It steals hopes. It robs dreams. It inhibits possibilities. It debilitates life. It robs joy and hope. And it's not just particular to individuals. It's also in organizations, and it's in institutions, and yes, it's even in the Christian church. And it grows slowly, almost unnoticed. Then the fear of failure becomes more real than the excitement about success or the possibilities that lay ahead. Change because of fear becomes the enemy. And the sameness becomes security. A negative attitude and a cynical spirit begins to dominate. The tyranny of the past becomes prevalent. At some point, all of us, every one of us in here, have bobbed up and down on a sea of doubt and worried what might lie ahead, tangled in fear and pulled by dread. Most of us have had our life dingy our little life's boat caught in violent storms, and we felt like in any minute our little dinghy is going to be swamped. We want Jesus to wake up. We want Jesus to wake up and do something. We want to know He cares. We know instinctively that those books we buy at Walmart are not going to solve our problem. We cannot solve it ourselves. That it's going to take a miracle. And therefore, it's going to take the holy to fix the fear. Wake up, Jesus. Wake up, Jesus. I'm in trouble. It's hard. It's rough. Life is calloused. Wake up. Save me before I sink beneath the waves. When was your last cry? Now, you guys are not going to admit it at all. You never cry, right? But you do. You do in the darkness when the door is shut. You cry. When was your last cry? All of us. When was your last cry? This morning? Yesterday? Last week? Last month? Last year? Life's not a calm sea, is it? We're not always rested. And we're not always at our personality's best. There's so much that disturbs us. There are so many things that fill us with fear. And I wonder, what are the things that feed your fear? I can give you a novel of those who feed mine. But I wonder what feeds yours. It was evening on the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not really a significant body of water. It's not as big as Lake Murray. No, nowhere near as big as Lake Murray. It's located nearly 700 feet below sea level. It's only 7 miles wide and 18 miles long. At its deepest point, it's 150 feet. Lake Murray is almost 400 feet. I've been blessed with an opportunity to be on it many times. And it is a beautiful place to go. And if you get to go and sit on one of those boats and go from Tiberias to Capernaum, you will be changed by the time you get to Capernaum. It is a beautiful, peaceful, inspiring journey. I've always been inspired by it. But what we lose in the trip is back then, when you got on the boat on the western side of Galilee, you were actually on the Jewish side. And to go to the other side, you're actually going to the Gentile side. So it's Holy Land going to not so Holy Land. It is the Jews going to the Gentiles, the holy people going to the center. And Jesus says, let's go to the other side. In other words, we're leaving the holy side and we're going to the less than holy side. They were going to a place that conscientious, spiritually driven Jews just did not go. But he wants to minister to the outcast, the shut out, the kept out, the pushed down, kept down. You know, the sinner. And Jesus has already had tremendous success with these Greek-minded people. Matter of fact, he's probably had more success with these sinners than he had with these holy people back in Jerusalem or in Jewish territory. But I'm getting ahead of the story. At the command of Jesus, the disciples get into this little boat. There's other boats there, but they get in the boat together. Now, I imagine those other boats are people who are watching, and there are other followers, but they're not the close disciples to Jesus. And that boat is very small, about the size of 2 pews, if you can imagine. Maybe a little bit longer. There's no mast, there's no sail. They're driven by oar. So you are at the sake of the water once you're out there. And you're not going to move very fast. 7 miles wide and 13, 15 miles long, I said 18, 13, 15 miles long, becomes more ominous when all you have in your hand is an oar. Now, at least 4 of these disciples were fishermen. So at least 4 of them are used to the sea. They're used to its character, its nature. But the rest of them probably have never been in a boat before. And as that small boat reached further and further out, they come to the point of no return. You ever been there? The point of no return? What that means is it's just as long going back as it is going forward, right? So if something bad happens, you might as well just keep going into the dark, okay? Keep going forward. And if there were clouds in the sky, it must have felt like swimming like an ink bottle, bobbing up and down on white caps. And nothing to light the way ahead of them. But then the storm strikes. It's getting dark, and then the storm strikes. Now, storms on the Sea of Galilee are pretty common. Now, see, what happens is the Mediterranean is very humid, and the humidity climbs up into clouds, and then when it hits the cool air of the mountains, it starts to storm. And the storms on Galilee can be very violent. They're short, but extremely violent. And this storm probably pops up in just minutes. And it rages for just minutes. But when you're caught in something like that, minutes, like that goose for me, minutes can feel like hours. And the high wind build even bigger waves, and both the wind and the waves batter against that boat. So the thought goes through the disciples' head, maybe Jesus can help. They had seen him do so many fantastic things, make the lame to walk, heal crippled hands, make the blind to see, and even raise someone stinky dead from the grave. Maybe he can help. Well, guess what? He's asleep. He's asleep. With not a care in the world. He's tucked up under the bow of the boat on a cushion, asleep. And these disciples are completely astounded, and they become angry. They become angry because they feel vulnerable. Jesus is their leader. He's in charge. He's supposed to take care of them. Now where is he? Well, he's asleep. He's taking care of his own needs. Shouldn't their needs be primary over his own needs? Does he not have any compassion for them or their situation? Then, just as you and I do, when someone does not respond in our preconceived way, what happens? They become angry. They get angry. And in an angry panic, they awaken Jesus. Peace be still, they say. And I think probably he said that just as much for their own soul as he did for that storm. He's speaking to their soul too. Peace be still. And the story says that the waves calmed, the sea calmed, the wind ceased to blow. And fear in these disciples go from being afraid of the storm to being afraid of Jesus himself. Because why? They realize who they're in the boat with. Who else can still a storm but the voice of God? And they're frightened. Who is this, they ask, that even the wind and the sea can obey him? Now, I don't know about you, but most of the time when I read that passage, I leave it a little critical of the disciples. You know, why aren't they more faith-filled? Why did they act like that? They've seen all those miracles. They heard all those teachings. Why are they acting like that? And then it dawns on me, I have a bigger advantage over than the disciples had, because I get to see Jesus from birth through life to death to resurrection, and his presence in my own life and the presence of others through 21 centuries. Even with those advantages over the disciples, nevertheless, I find myself sometimes just as afraid as they were, just as fearful, just as dread-filled as they. And just like them, I get irritated with him for not caring like I think he should, because it's in those times when my soul cries out, God, where are you? God, don't you care that I'm perishing? It's in those moments that I need faith. It's in that exact moment when what faith and I have is sorely tested. A great deal depends on just how much I have nurtured my faith through the years as to how much the fear and the dread and the anxiety affects me. John Wesley did not leave Savannah, Georgia on the best of terms. And matter of fact, he ran in the cover of darkness and got on board a ship. And on the way back to England, that ship was caught in a storm. And he was down in the belly of that ship crying out. He knew he was going to die in the Atlantic. And on the other end of that cargo area were some Moravians. And in the midst of that storm, when the ship is being tossed to and fro, those Moravians are over there singing, having prayer, hugging each other with smiles. And when the sea calmed and everything was over and Wesley's soul calmed down a bit, he went over to those Moravians and asked them, how were you able to do that? How were you able to sing in the midst of the storm? And they said, it's our faith. It's our faith in our Savior, Jesus Christ. And it was at that moment that Wesley realized his soul was not where it should be. And it would take the Aldersgate experience to make it right. We do have a choice. When tough times come, and they will come, and we have already experienced them, but a great deal hangs on our spiritual decision on how we're going to deal with it. Are we going to deal with it in faith or not? On Christmas Day, 1939, King George VI of England gave a national address. And if you remember, some of you remember, England was preparing for war. Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policy towards Germany was not working. And England was preparing for war. Things were scarce. They were building bomb shelters. Economy was wrecked. And so he went on radio and he addressed the nation. He said this. Now, notice he didn't say, don't worry, be happy. He didn't say, look on the brighter side. He didn't say, hope is good for breakfast and bad for supper. No, he didn't say any of those things. Here's what he said. I said to a man who stood at the gate of the year, give me light, that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, go out into the darkness and put your hand in the hand of God. That hall will be to you better than light and safer than a known way. So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trode gladly into the night. And he led me toward the hills and the breaking of the day in the lone east. So heart, be still. God knows his will is best. The stretch of years which winds dread, so dim to our imperfect vision, is clear God. Our fears are premature. In him all time hath full provision. Tremendous words. And I think those are good words for us today, because we are living in a time of fear. Fear. That's why we're so angry as a people. We are, aren't we? Yeah. Just go down Highway 17 and look at the road rage. We're an angry people. We attack one another now. 20 years ago, we would not have dreamed of attacking people openly or in private. You know, we say some terrible things about one another now that we would never have said 20 years ago. We act in ways, angry, dreadful ways today that we would not have acted 20 years ago. We have become an angry, disturbed people. Why? Why? Because down deep inside where we don't want anybody to see or exposed to the light, down deep inside, we're afraid. We're full of fear. I remember the words of Roosevelt after the attack on Pearl Harbor in Congress. In his speech, he said, "All we have to fear is fear itself." And he was dead on point. It's the same for us today. All we have to fear is fear itself, because it is the fear that has made us who we are today, not our faith. We can't eliminate the darkness within it. We can't conquer the enemy. That takes the power of God. And guess what? God doesn't kick the doors down on our soul. God doesn't rip the windows open on our soul. God comes in to our soul by invitation. By invitation. Storms come. They will continue. The waves seem too high and the wind too strong, but the promise, however, is that God will bring us through and will keep us on our feet through faith. Remember, tomorrow has two handles. There's the handle of fear, and there's the handle of faith. Which handle are we going to take hold of? So today we gather around a meal of faith. It reminds us that as Christ is in the boat, that Christ is indeed in the boat with us, that Christ is not asleep. Christ is very aware of the plight in which we find ourselves. His body and blood is a part of our here and now. So we can leave this place of faith and grace this morning, go back into the darkness of this world. And we can do it with faith. So if we have the faith, we can do it boldly. And we can be the light that others need for their way. May we go out into the darkness and keep our hands continually in the hand of God. Amen.